It was late afternoon in downtown Los Angeles, the kind of day where traffic hummed, tourists snapped photos, and office workers rushed to beat the evening rush. The sidewalks were busy but calm, until two bold police officers stepped onto the scene with a kind of swagger that instantly shifted the air. They weren't dangerous, but they were looking for someone to intimidate. Steven Seagal, wearing a simple black jacket, sunglasses, and his usual calm expression, was walking out of a small coffee shop. He didn't look like a celebrity today. He didn't look like a martial arts legend or a Hollywood icon. He looked like a regular guy enjoying a quiet day. And that was what made him a perfect target in the officer's eyes. "Hey, you, stop right there!" one officer barked, pointing directly at Steven as if he had just caught a criminal. People nearby paused and looked up. Steven slowed, turned his head slightly, and raised an eyebrow behind his shades. "Yes, officer," he replied in a calm, almost bored tone. The first cop approached aggressively, chest puffed like he was starring in his own action movie. "Don't play smart. We got a report about a suspicious man in this area. Matches your description." Steven blinked once. "Suspicious how?" "That's for us to decide," the second officer snapped. "Hands where we can see them." There was no reason, no explanation. Just ego, authority, and two men who thought they had found an easy target to push around. Steven, however, didn't react the way they expected. No panic, no fear, no attitude. He simply lifted his hand slightly, relaxed but compliant. People around them sensed something was off. The officers were too aggressive, too sure of their power. A woman whispered, "Why are they bothering him? He didn't do anything." But the cops didn't care. They circled Steven like he was some threat, demanding answers he had no reason to give. One officer stepped uncomfortably close, almost daring him to flinch. Steven stood steady, expression unreadable. And then came the moment that set the entire story into motion. The first officer grabbed Steven's arm, hard. The crowd gasped. The sidewalk froze. Because what the officers didn't realize was simple. They weren't grabbing a random civilian. They were grabbing Steven Seagal, one of the most dangerous men alive. And their regret was only seconds away. The instant the officer's grip tightened on Steven's arm, the atmosphere shifted from uneasy curiosity to full-blown tension. People stopped walking. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Even the traffic noise seemed to fade under the weight of the moment. Everyone could see it. This wasn't routine police work. This was ego. This was overreach. And these cops were seconds away from learning the hardest lesson of their lives. The first officer yanked Steven's arm again, harder this time, as though trying to provoke a reaction. "I said keep your hands where we can see them," he barked, voice rising with unnecessary aggression. Steven slowly tilted his head. "My hands are right here," he said calmly, his voice steady, his tone almost detached. "And I'm not resisting." But calmness, to men driven by ego, feels like defiance. The second officer stepped in, placing a hand on his holster, not drawing the weapon, just touching it enough to send a message. "We're in control. Not you. You fit the description of a suspect," he repeated, as if saying it again would make it true. "So we're gonna check you. Keep quiet and cooperate." Steven didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even show irritation. He simply watched them with that cold, calculated stillness he was famous for in movies. Except this time, it wasn't Hollywood. It was real. Around them, people began pulling out their phones. A teenager whispered, "Yo, these cops are crazy. They don't know who they're messing with." Another person murmured, "Is that really Steven Seagal? Or am I imagining things?" But the cops didn't care who he was, or who he might be. They were too locked into their own power trip to notice the growing crowd, the flashing phone cameras, or the murmurs spreading like wildfire. The first officer shoved Steven again. "Turn around," he snapped. "Hands behind your back." Stephen took a slow breath. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice carrying a weight that wasn't quite a threat, but definitely not a warning to ignore. "I'm telling you, this is unnecessary." "Shut up and do what you're told," the second cop snapped, stepping forward. "We don't need advice from you." One of them tried to force Stephen to turn by twisting his shoulder. It was a quick, sloppy move, an amateur attempt at control. For a split second, Stephen's eyes hardened behind his sunglasses. It was subtle, almost invisible, but anyone who truly knew him would have recognized that look. It was the look he gave right before someone learned the meaning of painful consequences. But still, he didn't resist, not yet. The crowd grew larger, sensing the shift. People whispered urgently, "He's not resisting. This is harassment. They're gonna get sued. Oh man, they have no clue who that is." The first officer pulled out a zip-tie restraint, preparing to cuff Stephen right then and there. "I said turn around," he repeated, louder this time, loud enough that even those across the street looked over. Stephen finally lifted his head fully to meet the officer's eyes. "Officer," he said slowly, calmly, with an authority deeper than shouting, "you're about to cross a line you can't uncross." The officer scoffed loudly. "Oh yeah? And what line is that?" As he moved to grab Stephen again, his partner stepped to Stephen's other side, reaching for his wrist. They were now positioned on both sides of him, overconfident and oblivious. But the more aggressive they became, the calmer Stephen grew. His shoulders relaxed. His breathing slowed. His stance settled into a subtle, centered balance that only martial artists recognized. A man in the crowd whispered, "He's grounding himself. They're done. They just don't know it yet." The second officer suddenly pushed Stephen's back with his forearm. "Stop talking. Turn around or we'll make you." The entire sidewalk inhaled at once. Stephen remained perfectly still. A long second passed. Then another. And then, just when the crowd thought Stephen might finally snap, the first officer shoved him again, harder than before, nearly causing Stephen to lose footing. That was the moment the energy snapped like a wire pulled too tight. Stephen didn't speak. He didn't yell. He didn't warn them again. He simply shifted his weight, ever so slightly. And for the first time, the cops noticed something. His arm, still in their grasp, didn't move the way they expected. His shoulder didn't fold, his body didn't bend, and his stance didn't break. Instead, it felt like trying to push a tree rooted deep into the earth. The second cop grunted. "What the? Why isn't he moving?" Stephen finally answered, his voice quiet enough to force them to lean in, yet strong enough to slice through the noise around them. "Because," he said slowly, "you're not strong enough." The officers froze. The crowd silently exploded with tension. Everyone knew this was the final calm before the storm. Because these bold cops hadn't just grabbed a random man on the street. They grabbed STEVEN SEAGAL. And now, they were about to face the consequences. The tension on the sidewalk thickened like a brewing storm. The two officers, breathing harder now, seemed confused, frustrated that their show of dominance wasn't working. They expected Stephen to fold like every other frightened civilian they had barked at. Instead, he stood there unmoving, unreadable, anchored with a calmness that made them even angrier. "Move!" the first officer barked again, voice cracking slightly as he tightened his grip. Stephen didn't even turn his head. "I told you," he said slowly, "you're making a mistake." That simple sentence struck the air like a warning bell. Not shouted, not aggressive, just delivered with an unsettling certainty. The crowd heard it. The officers heard it. And everyone felt the shift. But ego is a dangerous thing. And these cops were drowning in it. The second officer stepped closer, practically nose to nose with Stephen. "Stop talking like you're in control here," he snapped. "You're not. We are." Stephen's lips pressed into a thin line, not in fear, but in disappointment. "Control," he said softly, "isn't always loud." That line rippled through the crowd. People whispered, phones raised higher, recording every second. A bystander muttered, "These cops are messing with the wrong guy." The first officer, humiliated by how calm Stephen remained, shoved him again, this time using both hands. It wasn't procedure anymore. It was personal. "Turn around. I'm not gonna tell you again." Stephen swayed a half-inch from the force, then corrected himself effortlessly. The sidewalk went silent. He slowly turned his head toward the officer, just enough that the man's reflection appeared in the edge of Stephen's sunglasses. "You already crossed the line," he said. "Don't go further." For a brief, flickering moment, something in the officer's expression cracked. A flash of doubt. A spark of fear. A hint of realization that maybe, just maybe, he was provoking the wrong person. But pride shoved that thought away. "You think you can scare us?" the second officer barked, stepping behind Stephen. "You think you're some kind of tough guy?" Stephen exhaled slowly. "Thinking has nothing to do with it." The officer behind him grabbed Stephen's other arm, roughly, aggressively, pulling it back in preparation to cuff him. The move was sloppy, reckless, untrained. But what mattered wasn't the grip. It was Stephen's reaction. He stiffened, not in resistance, but in calculation. The crowd saw it. The officers didn't. Stephen's balance shifted from passive stillness into something poised, controlled, focused, like a coil preparing to spring. The first officer reached for the cuff. The metal glinted in the sunlight, just inches from locking around Stephen's wrist. "Don't," Stephen said firmly. The cuffs froze mid-air. It wasn't the word that stopped them. It was the tone, the depth, the finality. Like someone who wasn't asking. Someone who was informing. The second officer scoffed loudly, trying to mask the sudden chill running down his spine. "Or what?" he mocked. "What are you gonna do?" Stephen didn't blink. "Whatever I have to." Those words landed with the weight of a hammer. They weren't shouted, but the impact echoed through every bystander. People stepped back on instinct, sensing the shift in energy. One man muttered, "Oh, he's about to unleash something." A woman whispered, "Look at his stance, he's not even scared." But the officers, blind to their own mistake, kept pushing. Literally. The cop behind Stephen shoved his back with a forearm, trying to force him downward, even though Stephen's feet barely moved an inch. The first officer, frustrated and red-faced, moved in front and jabbed a finger toward Stephen's chest. "You don't tell us what to do. You're done. You hear me?" Stephen stared at the finger, then slowly looked back up at the officer's face. The crowd collectively held its breath, because there was something terrifying in Stephen's silence. Something ancient. Something trained. Something that didn't need to shout to warn. And then it happened. Stephen spoke again, his final warning. "Last chance," he said quietly. "Walk away." The second officer laughed the loudest, slapping the handcuffs against his palm. "Man, you talk too much. Face the wall before we really do this the hard way." Stephen's jaw tightened. His shoulders squared, and the calm in his eyes hardened into something far more dangerous. A bystander whispered, "Oh no, they just triggered him." Another person muttered, "This is about to become a lesson, and they're not ready." The officers took another step toward Stephen, too close now, too confident, too unaware of the storm they were inviting. The first officer grabbed his shoulder again. The second officer tightened his grip on Stephen's wrist. Phones zoomed in. The crowd leaned forward. Time felt like it slowed, preparing for impact. Stephen inhaled deeply, the kind of breath a fighter takes right before the world changes. Then, without raising his voice, he delivered the line that sealed the officer's fate. "I tried to warn you." If you were watching this live, what would you do? Step in, record, or walk away? Comment your answer. The air on the sidewalk had become almost unbearable, thick with tension, anticipation, and fear, mostly from the officers themselves, though they didn't realize it yet. The crowd was on edge, some gripping their phones, some frozen, staring at the unfolding drama as if it were a live-action thriller. Even the sunlight seemed to hesitate, casting long, tense shadows across the pavement. The first officer, frustrated beyond reason, shoved Stephen forward with brute force, expecting resistance, or at least compliance. But Stephen barely moved. His posture remained unbroken. His balance, his weight distribution, even the subtle flexing of his shoulders, everything was perfect. Like a coiled spring, invisible to the untrained eye. "Turn around!" barked the second officer, his voice high-pitched now with impatience. "We're not asking any more." The officers' combined force was heavy, coordinated, and confident, or so they thought. They had never encountered someone like Stephen. And in that moment, they were about to learn the consequences of misjudging him. Stephen exhaled quietly. Not a sigh, not a growl, just a single, measured breath. It was enough to make the first officer hesitate for a split second. A momentary pause, barely noticeable, yet enough for a trained martial artist to exploit. The officers didn't notice. They thought he was still intimidated. And that was their mistake. The first officer tried to grab Stephen's wrist and twist it behind his back. It should have worked. Any ordinary person would have cried out or at least stumbled. Stephen, however, reacted with lightning-fast precision. His body shifted, his weight moving subtly into the officer's momentum, and in an instant, the grip was neutralized. The officer's hand wrenched painfully against his own joints, and he yelped as he stumbled slightly forward, his balance disrupted. The crowd gasped. Phones zoomed in. People whispered in disbelief. The second officer tried to intervene, lunging toward Stephen from the side. He aimed for a basic control hold, hoping to dominate him with sheer size and authority. But Stephen, in a single smooth motion, sidestepped, caught the officer's arm, and applied a joint lock that made the man's face twist in shock and pain. The lesson was simple but brutal. Never underestimate skill over brute force. Stephen didn't shout, didn't attack aggressively, and didn't appear angry. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, efficient. Pain without unnecessary harm. A demonstration of control and precision. The crowd was stunned. Some held their mouths, some stepped back, and some whispered to each other, "Is this real? How is he doing that?" Even the first officer, regaining his footing, looked at Stephen with something akin to fear. His eyes darted from Stephen's calm expression to the phones in the crowd, capturing every move. He could feel his authority slipping away faster than he had imagined possible. "Stop it! Stop this right now!" he yelled, though his tone now carried panic. Stephen didn't respond verbally. He simply shifted slightly, applying just enough pressure on the second officer's arm to make him drop to his knees briefly. The motion was so seamless, so natural, that anyone who didn't know martial arts would assume it was luck, or magic. A teenage girl in the crowd whispered to her friend, "That's it, that's the real Steven Seagal. This is insane." The first officer tried to step closer again, intending to physically push Stephen. But now the momentum had completely shifted. Every attempt they made to assert dominance only highlighted their lack of skill. Stephen's body flowed around theirs, using minimal effort to control maximum impact. Pain was delivered, but never cruelty. Humiliation was public, but never personal. Each move told a story. This is what happens when arrogance meets skill. Suddenly, one of the officers tried a desperate grab for Stephen's jacket, hoping to overpower him. In one smooth twist, Stephen countered, leveraging the officer's weight against him. The man fell to the ground, hands clutching his shoulder in disbelief. The crowd gasped audibly. Phones everywhere recorded the incident. The murmurs spread like wildfire. "He's untouchable. Those cops messed with the wrong man. This is insane. He's not even mad." For the first time, Stephen finally looked at the first officer directly. Calm, unwavering, silent, but deadly serious. "You were warned," he said quietly, almost conversationally. "I don't enjoy this. I don't want to hurt anyone. But I will if pushed." The officer's chest heaved. Sweat ran down his temple. His confidence was gone. His swagger evaporated. It was clear now. Steven Seagal wasn't just defending himself. He was giving a masterclass in control, technique, and consequences. And the lesson had only just begun. The crowd leaned forward instinctively, unable to look away. Some were in awe, some in fear, all captivated by the unfolding reality. These cops had thought they were teaching a lesson. Instead, they were learning one. Have you ever seen someone completely outmatch authority with skill and calmness? Share your story in the comments below. The street had become a stage, and Steven Seagal the center of attention. The crowd's murmur had grown into a low, anxious hum. People whispered to one another, barely daring to move, barely daring to breathe. Everyone instinctively recognized one fact: this was no ordinary confrontation. These weren't ordinary cops. And Steven was no ordinary man. The first officer, still recovering from the initial counter, tried to regain some semblance of control. He stepped forward, fists clenched, eyes narrowing, trying to assert his dominance once more. "Stand still or we'll," he began, but stopped mid-sentence as Steven subtly shifted his weight. Steven's movements were almost imperceptible. His shoulders adjusted, his feet found perfect footing, his eyes locked on the officer's center of balance. In one smooth motion, he deflected the officer's forward push with the gentlest turn of his wrist, using the man's own momentum against him. The officer stumbled, lost his footing, and fell awkwardly to the ground. The crowd gasped. Phones raised, recording every second. Some viewers across the street stepped back in shock, murmuring, "He didn't even touch him hard, yet it's over." The second officer, seeing his partner toppled, lunged at Steven with a desperate grab for control. But Steven didn't panic. He was calm, fluid, like water flowing around a rock. With one swift pivot, he intercepted the grab, twisted the man's wrist, and applied a joint lock so precise it left the officer wincing in pain, kneeling on the pavement. Not once did Steven raise his voice. Not once did he strike recklessly. Every motion was calculated, efficient, deliberate. The lesson was now painfully clear. Skill and control always surpass brute force. The first officer scrambled to his feet, trying to intervene again. But his movements were sloppy, overcompensating, revealing every flaw in his technique. Steven intercepted him instantly, stepping in front, shifting his weight, and using his opponent's momentum to destabilize him. The officer nearly fell forward, clutching at his own uniform in disbelief. By now, the crowd was entirely silent, save for the occasional gasp or whispered exclamation. A young man recorded with his phone, saying quietly, This is unreal. He's doing this without even looking mad." Steven didn't look mad. He looked calm, almost bored, as if he had all the time in the world. Yet the power radiating from him was undeniable. Every move, every step, every subtle shift carried authority that no shouting or force could replicate. The second officer, still on his knees, tried to rise and reach for Steven's arm again. In one seamless motion, Steven guided him back down, applying just enough pressure to the shoulder to hold him there, ensuring compliance without unnecessary harm. "Do you understand now?" Steven asked quietly, his tone measured but lethal in its implication. "You were warned. You pushed further. And now, you feel the consequences." The first officer's chest heaved. Sweat streamed down his face. His confidence had evaporated. Every shred of swagger, every sense of authority he thought he had, was gone. He realized the painful truth. He had underestimated the wrong man. Steven's calm precision continued. He didn't attack. He didn't strike. He simply controlled, neutralized, and dominated. Each movement reminded the officers of a simple fact: arrogance and aggression are fragile when faced with true skill. The crowd leaned forward in awe. Phones captured every angle. The first officer sprawled on the ground, the second immobilized, and Steven standing tall, composed, almost serene in his mastery. People whispered, "He could have destroyed them if he wanted, and he didn't." It was not cruelty. It was not malice. It was education through action. A masterclass in balance, control, and respect earned, not demanded. Finally, Steven released both officers, allowing them to step back, recovering their posture but never their confidence. He adjusted his jacket, straightened his sunglasses, and took a small step back into the crowd. The lesson had been delivered. The humiliation was complete. And the public had witnessed it all. One bystander muttered in disbelief, That was beautiful. Calm, precise, and brutal. And they deserved every second of it." The officers, breathing heavily, avoided eye contact, too embarrassed and shocked to speak. They had learned, in seconds, that size, authority, or aggression mean nothing against mastery, control, and calm precision. Steven Seagal walked away, serene and collected, leaving a trail of stunned witnesses, recording devices, and two very embarrassed officers in his wake. The sidewalk remained silent for a heartbeat longer, before murmurs began, spreading like wildfire. The story was already being told on phones, in whispers, and eventually on social media. Everyone had seen it, the painful lesson delivered, perfectly, without a single unnecessary blow. Have you ever witnessed someone completely outclass their aggressors without throwing a single real punch? Comment below and share your story. The street was alive with a mixture of awe, disbelief, and muted laughter. The crowd had slowly begun to exhale, some still frozen, others whispering furiously into their phones. Everywhere you looked, people were replaying the scene in their heads, and on their devices, because what they had just witnessed was nothing short of cinematic. The two officers stood apart, their egos shattered. One rubbed his shoulder, wincing, his face pale with humiliation. The other adjusted his hat nervously, avoiding eye contact with the people who had been watching the entire encounter unfold. For the first time, they were painfully aware that authority and size meant nothing without skill and composure. Steven Seagal, standing a few feet away, didn't gloat. He didn't smirk or taunt. His posture was calm, collected, and completely controlled, the same serenity that had neutralized the officers in seconds. The crowd whispered among themselves, awestruck by the contrast. Two men consumed with arrogance, and one man, silent yet commanding, who had taught them a lesson they would never forget. "Did you see that?" a teenager asked his friend, eyes wide. "He didn't even yell. He just made them collapse." Another onlooker, recording the scene, said under his breath, "That's Steven Seagal. I've seen his movies, but this is real." Meanwhile, the officers tried to regain a semblance of control. The first officer cleared his throat, attempting to speak with authority, but his voice lacked conviction. "Sir, this isn't—" Steven interrupted, his calm voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "This isn't about authority. It's about respect. You forgot the difference." The first officer flinched. The second officer swallowed hard. Both knew there was no argument to be made. Their aggression had been met not with anger, but with perfect control. They had underestimated him, and the lesson was complete. The crowd erupted in murmurs of admiration and disbelief. Some laughed nervously, some clapped softly. Their phones were everywhere, recording, streaming, uploading. The clips would be online in minutes, perhaps hours, turning a private confrontation into a public spectacle. One bystander whispered to a friend, "These cops thought they were the stars, but he just stole the show without even trying." The realization settled over the officers like a weight they couldn't shake. Their faces betrayed it. The first officer's jaw tightened, the second's shoulders slumped. Both understood fully, and for the first time in their careers, that their bravado had been obliterated by technique, timing, and composure. Meanwhile, Stephen adjusted his sunglasses, casually checking his surroundings. His expression never changed, unfazed, serene. The contrast between his calm and the officer's embarrassment was stark. Every move they had made to assert dominance had been met with measured counter, every act of aggression neutralized effortlessly. The crowd began to approach, cautiously, phones held high, capturing the aftermath. A middle-aged man muttered, "I can't believe it. He didn't need to hit them. Just his control, wow." Someone else shouted from across the street, "This is going online. Everyone will see it." Indeed, within minutes, people started posting clips. Comments flew in. "Steven Seagal is untouchable." "Those cops messed with the wrong man." "Calm, collected, and deadly, classic Seagal." The public response was instantaneous. People shared the footage, tagging friends, replaying it over and over. What had been a tense moment on a quiet street had become viral content in record time. Memes, reaction videos, commentary, all capturing the same truth: skill and composure beat arrogance every time. The officers, meanwhile, were left to face the humiliation in real time. Their colleagues arrived later, seeing the scene as it had unfolded on phones and social media. The first officer muttered under his breath, We completely underestimated him." The second officer nodded miserably. I can't believe that just happened." For Stephen, it was over. The lesson was delivered. No harm had been done beyond the embarrassment and minor discomfort caused by his perfectly executed control. And yet, the impact was undeniable, etched into the memories of the crowd, recorded forever in social media, and witnessed by anyone who would see it online. The sidewalk slowly began to clear as the crowd dispersed, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others laughing, some whispering incredulously, "I can't believe we just saw that live." Stephen walked away without a word, leaving behind two humbled officers and a crowd that would not soon forget what they had witnessed. Every step he took exuded calm authority, a reminder that real power is silent, precise, and deliberate. And the clips. They spread like wildfire. Millions around the world would see them within hours. News outlets picked up the story. Social media exploded. Discussions flared. "Did you see how he handled it? Those cops had no chance. Skill beats brute force every time." The lesson was clear: arrogance can be corrected. Ego can be humbled. And sometimes, a single masterful display of calm precision is more powerful than force, aggression, or authority. Have you ever seen someone completely outclass their aggressors without throwing a real punch? Comment below and tell us what you would have done in this situation. By the time Steven Seagal walked off the sidewalk, the world was already watching. The footage captured on countless smartphones had begun its inevitable journey across social media. Within minutes, clips were uploaded to Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, showing the entire encounter: two overconfident officers trying to assert authority and one man, calm and controlled, effortlessly teaching them a lesson they would never forget. The reactions were instantaneous and explosive. Hashtags trended: hashtag Seagal lesson, hashtag come over chaos, hashtag skill over strength. News outlets grabbed the story, and videos amassed millions of views within hours. Across the globe, people were discussing, sharing, and replaying the incident. Comments poured in. "Those cops learned the hard way. Wow, that was pure skill and control. Stephen didn't even raise his voice. And yet they were completely owned." This is why arrogance always loses to experience. Every post told the same story. You don't need anger, size, or aggression to assert dominance. Skill and composure speak louder than anything else. Steven's quiet authority had left an unforgettable mark, not just on the officers, but on the crowd and the millions who would soon witness it online. Meanwhile, the officers were left to process the aftermath. Their humiliation was public, and their mistakes were documented and broadcast worldwide. Their colleagues tried to offer consolation, but nothing could erase the reality. They had misjudged the wrong man, and the lesson had been delivered flawlessly. For the crowd who had witnessed it live, the experience was surreal. Some replayed the footage over and over, marveling at Steven's precision and calm. Others discussed the broader lesson, that control, skill, and composure often outweigh raw power and aggression. Even outside the immediate scene, the story sparked conversation. Martial artists analyzed the moves, fans debated the techniques, and social media commentators praised Steven's restraint and mastery. This wasn't just a viral moment, it had become a cultural talking point. And yet, Steven remained unshaken. He didn't gloat, didn't celebrate, and didn't comment publicly on the incident. His actions spoke louder than words ever could. He had delivered a lesson, left an impact, and moved on. That silent confidence only made the story more compelling. The public reaction was unanimous: respect for mastery, awe at precision, and fascination with the calmness that had dismantled two overconfident officers without unnecessary force. People everywhere were inspired, not just by Steven's martial skill, but by the principle behind it. True power is controlled, deliberate, and measured. The viral clips continued to spread, accumulating millions of views. Memes emerged, reaction videos multiplied, and discussion threads exploded with debates, praise, and astonishment. Some joked about the officer's arrogance, others highlighted the lesson about humility. One thing was clear: the moment had captured the imagination of a global audience. In the end, it was more than a confrontation, it was a demonstration of skill, patience, and the undeniable authority that comes from experience. Steven Seagal had shown that real power doesn't need to shout. Real mastery doesn't need to boast. And arrogance, no matter how bold, is always vulnerable to control and precision. And now, the story is in your hands. Every view, every like, every comment keeps these lessons alive. So here's your chance to be part of it. If you were amazed by Steven Seagal's calm, skillful mastery, hit that like button, comment below your favorite part, and subscribe for more epic real-life moments where skill and intelligence triumph over arrogance. Don't miss the next story that will leave you shocked and inspired.